Why is it that although we have all been in the situation of getting unsolicited advice or not knowing exactly where to turn to when we are in the postpartum period, that we still struggle so much to give the right types of support to friends and family members who have new babies? Maybe it's because we're in such a fog during the postpartum period that it's hard to truly hold within ourselves what that feeling is of being lost in all the newness of adding a new family member. Today, I am so happy to present my conversation with Madison, who is a postpartum doula, as we discussed how she provides the types of supports that families need and are asking for, and her top tips both for people who are looking for more support in the postpartum period and who want to be better at giving support to their friends and family members. So, for the first time in a couple of months, enjoy this newest episode of the Milk Making Minutes. I'm your host, Lo NY Grosh, an internationally board certified lactation consultant on a mission to demystify feeding human milk to our human babies. Enjoy.
So my name is Madison. I am a DONA certified postpartum doula, as well as a Center for Pediatric Sleep Management, pediatric sleep consultant. Yeah, so I've been doing these full time for almost 2 years now, and I'm based out of northern Massachusetts. So I support families postpartum in this area, do sleep consulting virtually. And then prior to all of this, I was a child and family studies major in college and prior nanny and daycare manager. So I have seen all the things.
Yeah.
Lots of different age brackets that I've navigated and worked with, but that first few months infancy and newbornhood is my favorite. So I'm happy that I'm back in that little world now.
Yeah.
So
And when you did your training, I am a birth doula, but I have never done postpartum doula training. So
yeah.
I would love to know what were some of the topics that you really had to learn about in order to prepare to go into families' homes and support them?
Yeah. So it was definitely really eye-opening, I think, going into the postpartum training. I did train during, midst of COVID, so it was
Mm.
virtually. But it was kind of cool because you got to meet people from all over. And I would say, some of the things that we went over, I was like, okay, great. I already know these things, right? Like I may have learned them in college when I was doing child and family studies, or I may have experienced them when I was a nanny or a daycare teacher or a manager, whatever. But a lot of the times that was, personal preference type of learning rather than like informational educational learning. Um, but the biggest one that I think I really did learn a lot about was the idea of like this mental health side of things. I've talked with clients and I've talked with, parents previous to being a postpartum doula all the time about it, but being able to have the information behind like different emotional and social emotional and mental health things that go on for people after they give birth is so like I don't even know what word to use. It's so much more information and it's so much more like statistical in order to support them. Whereas before it would be more of just like a friendly conversation and, me trying to support somebody through something, even though I may not know all the information to it, if that makes sense.
I would love to know if you have ever been in a situation in which you could see that somebody's mental health was declining or they were really struggling and could probably use more mental health support. And what are the steps that you take in that situation to help guide people to making a decision that is going to help them have better mental health? Because one of the things I encounter with parents a lot is that it's such a new experience that whatever you're feeling, just feels like your new normal. And you don't know how to compare your experience with other people's experiences, even if you've already had children. You've never had that number of children. You've never been
Right.
in this exact situation. You've never had the exact type of birth you had before, or there's a variety of reasons why it might be different from one baby to another. So sometimes when mental health is declining in somebody in the postpartum period, it's really hard for them to recognize that's what's happening. So, how does a postpartum doula help to kind of navigate that type of situation with clients?
Absolutely. And to that, I'd also say that it's often tricky for doulas because I'm not your best friend. I didn't know you before you had your baby. So, how you're acting now might be who you are, or it might be the total opposite. And I'm not super aware of that. So, I'm kind of referring to and leaning on those support persons a little bit, especially if both parents are really involved. I'll typically talk to the support person maybe when the mother is nursing or napping and saying, like, hey, how are things going for you guys? Or like, how has she been doing really? Right. Or, same thing with partners, talking to the moms about like, how are they really doing? Because you don't really know. And there is, mental health stuff that goes on with partners as well. So, talking about it with the other person to kind of be like, okay, are they seeming like themselves or are they not? And then knowing how to go from there. So, I mean, it makes me, you kind of said, is there any examples? Yes. I think about one client in particular who I think definitely had some postpartum anxiety going on. And working with them was really great to be able to help her navigate that. And she did have a therapist already from previous, which was great. So it wasn't like I needed to refer out to her to talk to somebody. But what I was able to do was help start to ease that anxiety. And sometimes with that, it is more like exposure therapy type stuff, right? So for her, she had a lot of anxiety about like losing her own, personal self in becoming a mother. So like who is she still even though now she's
Mm.
a mother? And then we would navigate together, what are the things that she wanted to learn during that shift that then we would go over together. So, I'm getting laundry and putting baby down for a nap and whatever while she takes her self-care time, and then we regroup and we're able to learn things and support together. And I think that that really helped her to learn and find her own individual self. She was very like nature driven. And so she was saying to me, it's very nerve wracking to me, and I don't know how to navigate getting baby from the house to the car seat, from the car seat to the car, from the car to the baby carrier, and on a walk. And what if he poops? What if I have to change him and we're out? How do I navigate that? And all of that was so anxiety provoking to her. But deep down, she knew that by going on this walk, it was going to make her feel better. So, what we were able to do was navigate this as a quote unquote excursion. So, we went for walks, or one time we went to a coffee shop and we're like, okay, well, if you were to come here to get coffee and you got your coffee and you sat down, where would we put him? Where would
Mm.
you sit? If you felt like he was really fussy and needed to feed, how would you navigate that? And making her feel comfortable and like almost practice a situation with a trusted individual with her made that feel so much better. And then she would text me and say, oh my gosh, we went on a walk and it was great.
Oh, I
And
love
I think
that.
that definitely helped. Yeah. So trying to find aspects of yourself and your own personal identity that you could bring your baby with you to can make you feel really confident in motherhood, parenthood as a whole. And then also not being afraid to take some time to step away and be like, okay, I need me time and that's okay. And what does that look like? I think is the two big things that I typically am working with clients with when I notice those types of, mental health struggles starting to set in a little bit more.
Yeah. I would love to get into more specifics about how you support people in the postpartum period, but then also thinking about how can other people transfer the types of supports that you give, because we live in a world where everybody should have postpartum doulas,
Yeah.
but it is not really available to so many people. I think
Yeah.
there are creative ways that families could find to hire doulas, like using a gift registry where you can have a fund to hire a postpartum doula. And I know that in the state of Massachusetts, Mass Health is now allowing postpartum and birth doulas to register for a mass health participant, and then insurance will cover. But from what I have seen and heard, there's a lot of hoops to jump through before you can
I've heard the
be
same.
registered. So we know there is this lack of access to care. So I would love to hear from you before we get into kind of some of the more practicalities about how you navigate this lack of access to care. And if you do have people who are really needing help, but it's going to be a real squeeze to afford your care, the types of advice you offer them or ways you help them kind of figure out how they could make it work.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's many ways that I'm supporting people. A lot of the time, like you mentioned, I will suggest gift cards or gift registries being utilized for this kind of support. People are so much more willing to donate money and cash to things like that now, as long as they know where it's going. If you think about when you go to weddings, you're often, you're not doing a lot of like buying of items from a registry anymore. You're doing a lot more of like donating money for them to do something specific on a honeymoon, or giving money for something to go towards like a house renovation or whatever that may be. And I think people are more willing to donate that now because they see how expensive the world is, and they appreciate that people are specifying what it is that they're doing with said money. And that's typically something I will mention. I do offer gift cards, so that's something I often
Hmm.
mention to my clients. And then when it comes to like additional support, if they really just can't afford to have that care, I'll offer like one off virtual postpartum support. So rather than booking like a 4 hour shift, you could do 1 hour, and do that virtually. During that time, you could ask specific questions. You can do those types of things. I also call them like an ask me anything call, where you really just get to ask literally anything and I will give you my unfiltered answers. So, you're getting truly that information, and then you can have the ability to like implement that yourself. The other thing that I've started to offer is I have a membership. And so people are able to sign on whether they've been a past client or not, and they're able to kind of like ask questions about all the things. I also send them out a newsletter, and they get to book a 30-minute one-on-one Zoom call once a month if they're interested in doing
Mm.
so. The newsletters include things like tummy time or sensory play. I talk about newborn tips and tricks, and every month it's a little bit different. I try to vary it on age depending on what clients and what members there are that month. But overall, it's really great because I'll get people messaging about, sleep questions, or which swaddle to use, or my baby's starting to roll. How do I navigate that? Or, my baby keeps peeing through their diaper. Do you know why? Or do you have any tips? And little things like that, that it's so much more reassuring to ask a human who does that every day than going to Google and having to weed out the proper information, when especially you don't have the time to do
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Or going onto a Facebook group where you're just going to get demolished for whatever decision you're trying to make for your family.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I see that all the time. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, I wish you had a supportive person who you felt like you could ask this question and not a bunch of strangers in a humongous group."
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've literally actually run like one off support groups for some Facebook mom groups that's called like Don't Ask Google, Ask Madison, because literally I'm like, don't ask Google, don't ask the Facebook groups, like
Mhm.
get the professional input. Like we said earlier, it's going to be more factual based, and it's going to be, more understanding because we navigate that.
As an IBCLC, people will often ask me, what is the best thing to do in blank situation? And I'm like, well, there's the absolute ideal, given that everything is as this particular study set it up to be. And then there's real life. So let's
Right.
talk about what is your situation and what feels good for you, and why is it that you're asking this question to begin with? Is it because you're feeling some sort of external pressure to do something differently? Or is it because, no, you're actually really struggling with this and need to find a solution that works for you? Because that's the beauty of hiring a postpartum doula or an IBCLC, is that you aren't going to get the same advice you would find even on great websites. Like Kelly Mom is a great breastfeeding website, but if you could find everything you needed adapted to your particular situation, there would be no need for people like me and people like you. But the
Right.
reality is those things are guidelines. And then you have to take the guidelines and figure out how you adapt that to your individual situation. So it's so great to have somebody that you can just run these sorts of questions by. And in the example that you gave about the mom who was very anxious about going on a hike and going out to a coffee shop, it's like, what a great service to say, hey, let's do a practice run. I'll be there to support you. And then maybe the next step would be, do you have a friend who would be willing to meet you? And so then it helps
Yeah.
her kind of graduate to doing it on her own, but she may not have thought to just bring in support to go do the walk had you not been there to say, hey, let's try it out together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, right? Like you can ask a friend, and finding a friend can sometimes be hard, right? They say like it takes a village, but where the heck is the village?
Mhm.
And so having a postpartum doula or a friend who's had a baby to help you point you in the direction of those hot and cold mom groups on Facebook, because they are sometimes beneficial to meet people or to find events in the area to help you get out of the house, or even asking friends who they've been hanging out with and going to do something with them out in the world. Or they even have those apps like the Peanut app that helps you find different people and find friends. But finding people that are willing to kind of navigate that with you. Most of the time, the parent is the one that's more stressed about the ability to stay at a place long enough, and they're like, oh my gosh, is this friend going to be so upset if we have to leave early or all of this? And the friend is like, no, we're here to do whatever we need to do, and if we need to leave, we need to leave.
Yeah, I love that kind of thinking outside the box. So, when somebody is reaching out to you for support, let's say somebody's listening right now and they're in the thick of the postpartum period, or perhaps they're pregnant and planning for the postpartum period. What are the biggest pain points that you are hearing from families that are reaching out to you? What are the things that they are struggling with that they feel they might need some help with?
I feel like the first one really, it depends on the person and the family, but I feel like society has made everybody think that they need to know everything. And so being able to have people reaching out, a lot of the time it is mothers being like, "Hey, I need some support because I'm not really sure how to navigate this," or, "My husband and I don't really know much about infants, and so we need some support understanding how to support our baby." And understandably, if people come prenatally, a lot of the times the same thing is happening, and it's, both parents saying, I don't know anything about infants and I want to be, prepared for my baby, and I want to be an active parent. And so I need to learn how to do this. And I was actually just doing an inquiry call this morning and talking to them because they were doing that. And I said, a lot of the time it's great. And a lot of my clients ask for me to come in and help them navigate different parts of infancy, because it's a lot easier to listen to a third party perspective and a professional's perspective on these things than to try and tell your partner what to do, because a lot of the times that can create like some big tiffs within your partnership. And we already know that first year of life is really difficult. So having a professional come in to help you navigate a situation rather than having to listen to, one parent telling the other, that no, we have to do it this way, or no, we're supposed to swaddle like that, can be a lot better for for those relationships.
Yeah, yeah, just to have another sounding board in the room.
Absolutely. And then the other thing I typically see a lot of people reaching out about is just sleep. People
Mm,
don't realize how hard it is to navigate the world and to function as an adult on smaller amounts of sleep, but not even just smaller amounts of sleep. It's more just like chopped up sleep.
right.
So sleeping like 2 hour chunks at a time, if that, maybe you're getting a full 6 hours, but it's like 2 hour increments. And so you're not getting the REM sleep you're used to, and it just doesn't feel the same. Um, and trying to navigate like, okay, how do we handle that? Do I need to hire, postpartum support in the evenings, or, am I maybe missing something that I can do to help make those night wake ups shorter, or things like that? So those seem to be the two things that I hear the most when people are reaching out.
Yeah, okay. So, So here on the Milk Making Minutes, we focus on milk making. And I would love to know, as a postpartum doula, of course, you are supporting all sorts of families and
Right.
regardless of their feeding choices. What do you notice as the biggest difficulties that families are experiencing when it comes to breastfeeding or pumping specifically?
Um, Typically it's a lack of knowledge. I'm finding that people don't really know how to latch, they don't really know how to pump, they don't really know what they're supposed to be producing and all of that as well. And so I think that, navigating this kind of like new realm of things can be really overwhelming. I know on the episode that you came on my podcast with, we talked about boundaries to breastfeeding. And I think one of the things you mentioned that I think really relates to this and I resonate with is people just don't see breastfeeding as much as they used to. And there's a lot of boundaries and things to understanding how it all works, I think. And so people don't know what to do. And a lot of the time, if they are trying to breastfeed and nurse and navigate that, they're worried, oh my gosh, my baby's not eating enough, or my baby's on the boob too long or too much. They're not getting enough, or I'm not supplying enough that they need. And so then those anxieties just spike and it makes things definitely much harder.
Yeah, yeah. And one of your primary roles as a is to support families in meeting their own goals, whatever they are, or shifting goals if needed. And so I would love to know how, because let's say doesn't have a postpartum doula, but they are seeking out advice from a trusted friend or family member, or let's say, somebody is now thinking about being that trusted friend or family member. How is
Yeah.
it that when somebody comes to you with a breastfeeding difficulty that you are able to help them make the decision that is right for them without, including your own bias into
Right.
the situation? Because we all have biases, and anyone who says they don't is not actually looking in to see inward to say look at their biases. So, of course, even as a lactation consultant, I have biases, but there's a difference between saying, "This is what I think is absolutely best," and "This is what is best for this particular family," or helping a family decide what is best for them without me forcing my views on them. So, how is
Right.
it that you help families do that? And I would love to hear some tips for listeners of the podcast to say, that I could incorporate that when people ask me questions about how to do something.
One of the things that we talk a lot about during the postpartum doula training is remembering and knowing to listen in a lot more than you're talking. So
Mm,
giving those clients and those parents the opportunity to truly talk out loud, because sometimes talking out loud they find their own answer. So if they're struggling with breastfeeding, and because of that they're not sleeping a lot at night and they're trying to decide how they can get more sleep, sometimes sitting down and talking to them and just saying like, okay, what's going on, what happens when you wake up, okay, now what could your options be? Well, we can continue to do it this way, we can try to adjust and maybe nurse in this fashion, or we can pump, or we could switch to formula, and kind of offering these suggestions of all the options and even going into depth of like what those options may look like in action, and then being like, okay, how do you feel about that? Is there anything that stands out to you that is an absolute I don't want to do that, or an absolute that's the one, right? And if there's parts of all the different ones, like how do we mash them together to find like your perfect solution? And I think that that's a big thing. I mean, I had a client who really was trying to nurse but was struggling, milk supply, baby wasn't gaining weight, so she started pumping. And recently we were just talking about it and I was like, so how are you feeling about this? Like, just because you're pumping now doesn't mean you can't nurse later. And she was like, honestly, I feel so much better pumping. I know what he's getting, I feel like I'm still giving him those benefits. And she said, I feel like it's horrible to say. She's like, but I didn't really enjoy nursing.
mm,
She said, it wasn't something that I thought, she said, I thought it was something I thought that I would really, really like and that I'd feel that bond with. She said, but I feel more of a bond with him when I just get to hold him and rock him to sleep, or when I get to snuggle him, or when I get to do skin to skin. It for me, I didn't feel this very big of a difference when I was specifically nursing. So I'd prefer to pump because it's more time effective and I can have somebody else help to feed him. And so for her, we walked through all those options. And we're like, okay, great. Then that's what we're going to do. And I think then being like a supportive person to that. And like you said, trying not to have your biases. So if you're someone listening and you're trying to help a friend to navigate something like this, giving them options and saying, you could say, hey, this is what I did, but understanding that you're not saying like, this is what you should do. And when they decide what they want to do, being able to say like, okay, great. Well, how can I help you do that? How can I help support you in making that happen? Are you exclusively nursing? Can I bring you food? Are you pumping? Do you need me to wash the pump parts? Whatever you can do to help support them to feel like they're making a choice that is feasible and doable for them, I think is the biggest part of it.
Yeah, I love that. And just along this line of thinking, what would you say? How what would you say to people who are the ones who might be seeking out advice? How can they ask in such a way that indicates, um, I don't actually want your advice. Maybe I just need to talk this through, and I'll let you know. Have you seen clients navigating trying to make decisions in a way that turned out to be really successful for them, kind of finding their own way, but also bouncing ideas off of people?
Absolutely. I find a lot of this with like parents and in-laws. So I talk with clients a lot about like how do we
Mm.
navigate having, grandparents in with you and in your space during this postpartum period, and being still in a good mental health place. Not to say that every, in-law is like this, but the generationally things have changed so much. I mean, things change in the newborn world day to day. So, generation to generation, it's a very big change. So, for parents and grandparents to understand, expectations of what families want to do with their newborn. And like you said, being able to bounce ideas off without necessarily having specific advice or, request of how to feed the baby from other people can be tricky. So, a lot of the time, I say if people are listening and they're in the early stages or they're prenatally, I always suggest having a postpartum plan. And part of that being preparing for what expectations you have for visitors. So, if you have expectations that you really want to breastfeed, making sure you and your partner are on the same page as that, you're a united front, and you're stating to people when they come, if baby gets fussy and they want to feed, we are going to be nursing strictly from the breast. We're going to be breastfeeding to start to try that out and to start. And what you can do during those times is XYZ.
Mhm.
Um, and also, some people will even send a message out before baby's born saying, like, hey, we're really excited for you to come. Just please know that, like, we want to do this, this, and this. And so, if you are not feeling comfortable with that, we request that, you support us in another manner. When it comes to asking people for advice, I think you have to be really straight up with it. So when people come in, even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable, saying like, oh, I've been really struggling with like, breastfeeding. And if people maybe or your guest tries to start giving their input, just saying like, oh, like I really appreciate that you're trying to be helpful, but I'm just trying to vent. I just have a lot on my mind. I think it'll feel better just to get it out. And I don't actually need any input. I think I'll figure out what's best for me and just kind of want someone to talk out loud to. And maybe even saying like, is that okay? Are you willing to listen? Do you have space for me to vent?
Mm.
And you'll quickly find who are the people that you can
Yes.
vent to and who are the people that are not those people.
Yes, exactly. Anyone who has listened to any episode of the podcast where I happen to mention my own experiences will know I am an oversharer, typically, but when I had my first son and I struggled for years with breastfeeding him, but I knew it was the right decision for me. And uh quickly learned the people who, I was going to be honest with about how my experience was going, and the
Yep.
people who would ask, and I would be like, "Yeah, things are fine," because I did not want their input.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's you learn your people. You learn who's good for what. Like in the plan that I have and when I talk to my clients, writing things out that people can help with when they come to the house is great, but delegating to specific people is even better.
Mm.
Knowing who you can have watch your baby while you go take a shower or, take a nap versus who you want to hold the baby with and you're going to ask them to maybe go make dinner or, clean the bathroom for you or take the
Mhm.
trash out or take the dog for a walk. You learn the people that are good at what specific thing that helps you.
Yeah.
And that's really, really helpful to learn who to delegate what to.
Yeah, that's great. That's really solid advice. I would love to know some of the ways that you see couples navigating baby feeding in ways that is really supportive. And then ways that you have seen dynamics that actually make it harder for the feeding parent to feel confident about their decisions. Do you see a difference there? And do you notice the ways that the feeding parent is able to advocate for themselves and still maintain their relationship, and ways that they actually might be making things worse?
Absolutely. So I definitely have seen both. And I see both with when it comes to like feeding and nursing, but also when it comes to like all of parenthood. So I think one thing that I suggest again when it comes to prenatally, if you have the ability to think about it, navigate what the goals are, like I said, so that you are a united front, but also so that your partner can support you and vice versa to make sure that you guys are, feeling like you're going at this parenting thing like the best that you can. Um, and so, for example, like with the great kind of situations, I'm often finding, parents who the partner's saying things like, okay, I'm going to wash these pump parts for you, or like, oh my gosh, you're doing great, or like without even being asked, is bringing like snacks or food, and alternatively, somebody who maybe not might be not as supportive, or without realizing it or not. Sometimes it is a subconsciously, they're kind of like stabbing at the breastfeeding issue. And so some parents like will partners will like wash bottles or bring them snacks, but they'll also be like, oh, well, this seems like it's too hard on you. Why don't we just do formula?
Mm.
Or, you're so tired. Why are you saying you're so tired? Like, I know you're tired. Why don't we just let you pump? Why don't you just go 5 hours instead of 3 hours pumping?
Mm.
Or why don't you just sleep just tonight then? And well, that's well intent, it kind of becomes like a backhanded thing,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of the times, if partners don't have the education, they don't understand that going 5 hours without pumping instead of three could cause a dip in supply. Or, by saying, why don't you just do formula maybe 3 or 4 times, can make that breastfeeding parent feel like, oh, well, they're right. I'm not doing what good enough. Like, I should just give in.
Mm.
And I think that it needs to be more of like, partners saying, "Hey, I know you're tired. What do you want to do about handling this? Like,
Mm.
do you want to try, like we said earlier, to do formula? Do you want to try and pump?" Like, giving options maybe. And then, reassuring them that it's okay if we said we were going to breastfeed and you're feeling like it's too much and you need to do an alternative, rather than just saying, like, why don't we just do this? Right? I think there's a difference in like tone
Mm.
and word choice,
Mm.
which can be two things that are very difficult to navigate when you're exhausted.
Yes.
So
Yeah, that's so true. And, people all the time are in the exact same, it seems, situation where they're struggling, and person A really needs to keep going. That's what she feels deep inside her heart, that even though it's hard, I need to keep doing this and I will feel worse if I stop. And person B feels like they do need permission to stop. And that's what they've been waiting for. And that's what will make them
right.
feel better. And it is so important for family members and partners to say, what do you need right now in this moment? Do you need options? Do you
Yes.
need me to just listen? Do you need me to validate how hard you're working? What is it that I can do to support you without just assuming? Because I've seen this dynamic too, where the partners are like, don't be so hard on yourself. We can give the baby a bottle, but that's not helping. And I'm wondering, do you see a big difference in partners who attend like prenatal meetings together versus partners who only one person attends those meetings?
That's a great question that I really haven't thought about statistically, like in comparison. It is something I ask clients when they sign on with me. I ask, have you read any books or attended any workshops? And I mean, thinking about it, probably, yeah. I think that it really just has to do with like how involved the parent and partner is, though. I have a lot of partners who the family is hiring postpartum support so that the partner can learn as well. And because the partner is acknowledging that they don't have newborn knowledge and they want to be an involved parent. So, how do they help? Well, they hire a postpartum doula to help them learn. But then I alternatively have people who hire that from the get go, I can tell I'm going to need to be that mother's number one support person
Mm.
because I'm being hired because partner is going back to work, or because we know that the partner is going to, say they need to sleep so they can go back to work rather than, taking on one of the night feeds so that the mother isn't feeling as, sleep deprived and is feeling supported. Or I'm being hired because the partner grew up a very different way and they need, you know, understanding and support of how to navigate like a now's generation type of parenting, whereas like how they were parented was very different and not how they want to be with their kid. So, there's definitely two different ways of parents that come up when we're talking about that. And I think part of it probably does have to do with courses taken prenatally, but I think a lot of it even more so has to do with the equality of the partnership
Mhm.
and creating like equitable like partnerships that you know people are feeling supported on both sides.
Yeah, for me, I was thinking about, the difference between clients how supported clients feel by their partners when the partner attends, um, a consultation versus when they don't. So I was thinking about
Oh
when
yeah.
clients attend your prenatal call versus when they don't, because
Yeah.
that's part of the information gathering, right? And if the
Right.
IBCLC or the postpartum doula says, "Listen, this is why she can't skip a feeding if her goal is to exclusively breastfeed," then they're more willing to not pressure her,
I
those
love that point
differences.
too. Yes, absolutely, totally. I was thinking more just like prenatal classes, but
No.
yeah, especially with prenatal appointments too. That's great. Yeah, being able to be a united team when it comes to like all of those and making sure that you can attend all of those meetings so you get the proper information is definitely super helpful. I think in making sure that that partnership is strong and on the same page.
Yeah, and sometimes the partners ask really smart questions where I'm like, "Oh, wow, that is a
Yes.
really smart question," because 'cause they're just thinking about it from a different angle, and so
Yeah.
having them ask things that are on their mind helps them to support the feeding parent when the time is right. I know when I am in hospitals, I work at a hospital just a few days a month, and I can always tell those partners who are really going to support the parent to like make whatever decision feels best for her, and those partners who are like, I'll just sit in here on my phone. This is the lactation person. It doesn't have anything to do with me. And they're tired too, and I might not be seeing the best of them in that moment, but it is interesting to see those differences.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I love that you brought that point up. It's so true.
So, as we wrap up here, is there any final thought that you have for people planning on trying to meet their baby feeding goals, whatever they might be, that you would like to share?
I would say really just don't be afraid to ask for support. Whether it be like we said, venting, just finding someone to talk to, or finding somebody that can give you that support that you're looking for. And it's never too early to find that support. Like I said, creating a postpartum plan and having like IBCLCs and lactation support on that so that when it does come time that you need support, you can easily just, call them rather than having to do a 2 a.m. Google search
Right.
is huge.
It is so huge. I say that all the time. And you offer a postpartum plan that people can purchase. So we'll
Correct. Yeah,
have
I
that.
have a workbook on
That's great.
on Etsy.
We'll have that linked in the show notes. And then right before we go, just tell people how they can find you, where they can find your podcast, and all those things. And they'll all be linked in the show notes, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my podcast is called The Postpartum Plan. You should definitely head over and listen to the episode we did together too. But that is weekly episodes about just different topics that can be super supportive for the postpartum period. And then my website is www.serenemomentsdoula.com. You can find me on social media at serenemoments.doula. And I offer 30-minute free connection calls. So you can check that out for postpartum support if you're in the Southern New Hampshire, Northern Massachusetts area. area, or for sleep support, I do that all virtually. So no matter where you are, if you need some support, let me know. And I'm happy. I try to meet parents where they're at. So, navigating in whatever fashion works for families.
That makes sense. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today and your expertise.
Thank you so much.
Bye. So if hearing this conversation, you are thinking, I do need some different supports. I am struggling with bottle refusal. I am struggling with painful breastfeeding. I am struggling with a baby who is constantly fussy in the car seat. And in my gut, I feel like something is wrong, but everybody keeps telling me it's okay. Reach out for support. I would love to be the person who provides you free, insurance-covered lactation support wherever you are in the country. So go to www.quavinbirthservices.com. You can book right on my website, or you can contact me from there to figure out how to get the best support for your family. See you next week.